It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Christopher Dickey is foreign editor. How are you, sir?
Glad to be here.
Glad you could make it. Glad to welcome as well Ana Navarro Pedro, Paris correspondent for the Portuguese news weekly Visão.
Indeed.
Nice to see you.
Nice
to see you as well. Elena Gabrielan of the Russian language service of sister station Radio France International. How have you been?
Great, thanks.
And Andreas Evagora, who is senior producer for Olympic programming at Eurosport. How are you, sir?
All good. Good to be here.
The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag World This Week. It is a football mad world. For 1 month, all eyes on Russia as it hosts its biggest sporting event since the 1980 Summer Olympics. The hosts surprising even themselves in the World Cup opener with a resounding 5-0 thumping of Saudi Arabia.
We know that today 1 million people are watching us. All of Russia and our hearts are together with you today. Friends, come on, let's embrace today. Our victory unites us all in the Russian nation.
Россия! Россия! Россия!
Elena Gabrielan, your thoughts? Because we'd heard the president playing down expectations before the tournament.
Well, by myself, I'm quite surprised by this score 5-0. It is, especially when we know that this generation of Russian footballers are not really very, very strong as it was, for example, 10 or 15 years ago. But for Putin, he won his game. He organized this World Cup, and for him, is it a big campaign, a PR campaign, for not only abroad, but also for domestic policy. He wants to show this and support this patriotic spirit in the country that we are able to organize such kind of event. And even if a majority of Russians are quite happy to host this championship, you have also others who are not satisfied by the limit of circulation, protests, and also some not justified costs of some stadiums like Saransk and Samara, which were not quite justified and criticized.
Yeah, big stadiums for small cities.
Yes, and especially when we remember the cost of Winter Olympic Games, record $50 billion for Winter Olympic Games in Sochi. And still in Sochi, you have some infrastructure problems.
All right, I want to get the panel's reactions on everything you've just described. But first, Andreas, what did you make of that opening ceremony before it even began that featured 90s teen idol Robbie Williams making a rude gesture? What was that all about?
I'll be honest, I can't stand Robbie Williams, and as soon as I saw him, I just turned the TV off. I'm not at all interested in opening ceremonies. I understand their importance. This is reflected glory. There'll be a feel-good feeling in Russia, but these are really very temporary things. I mean, I remember being in Belo Horizonte during the 2014 World Cup when Brazil got thumped 7-1. And Brazilian after Brazilian was coming up to me and saying, look, this is the end of Brazil. This country is just finished. And I was like, what are you talking about? Look what's happened to Brazil since going back to 2010. You know, South Africa has a disastrous economic performance since 2010. So I think for the 5-6 weeks...
Is there a curse of the World Cup?
Well, I don't think it's one way or the other, because people say, oh, because of the World Cup, things go well. I don't think the impact is medium term, let alone long term. There's a short-term feel-good factor. Look what Putin's doing in Russia at the moment. He's raised the retirement age already. He's raising VAT, so maybe people's minds will be off that. But, you know, it'll be great till July the 15th, and after that, I think people will go back to their previous lives.
I don't quite agree with you. I think in terms of soft power, that Putin was able to organize this championship this year in Russia, it's really something important. It gives a positive image of the country. We know why, but still, no hooligans so far in Russia. No hooligans, only 1 day. But still, we've had in France. You've had them, really before the matches started. But I think, in terms more seriously, in terms of soft power, I think it's really a win-win for Putin. In economic terms, I totally agree with you. Portugal organized European Championship 2024. Yeah. We are still in debt because of that. But for intern purposes, internal policy, it's still a big win for any country who organizes it. And for Putin at this time in history, it's not bad.
Mixed bag I noticed in your coverage, Christopher Dickey, because on the one hand, you talked about those who are making a lot of money out of this, even those who are under sanctions. And on the other, this bizarre statement from the chair of the Family Affairs Committee, the lower house of parliament, warning Russian women not to go out with men of other races.
Yeah, that's Russia for you. I mean, it's look, that was a clearly racist statement. I mean, she was even more explicit than that. She said, there's this myth in Russia that after the 1980 Olympics, which, by the way, the Americans boycotted, after the 1980 Olympics, supposedly there were all these black babies that showed up in Russia. Seriously, this is the myth in Russia. Am I wrong about that, Elena?
It's true.
This is the idea. So that's specifically what she's referring to. And she even was explicit. She said, it's okay with your own race, but not with other races.
Because
Now,
you risk to say single mothers.
Yeah, you're being single mothers with black babies. That's the issue.
Exactly.
When in fact, yes, there are a lot of black Russians, and a lot of them are the children of students who were brought by the Soviet Union, brought by Russia to study there. And in fact, we'll have a story coming out tomorrow about Nigerian women who are being trafficked to Russia right now, because you can get in without a visa. And all you need is a fan ID and a ticket, and you can get in. And so there are lots of Nigerians who are being trafficked.
So for every possible good story, there are probably 10 bad news stories about Russia, which is why it's a gamble. I mean, Russia might come out of this with a better image. It might come out with an image that's a hell of a lot worse for the reasons you're talking about.
But for me, I mean, I should recuse myself from this because you don't like opening ceremonies? I don't follow football, soccer, any of this at all. But from a political point of view, these games should never have happened. This should have been boycotted exactly the way the 1980 Olympics were boycotted. If, after Crimea, the world wanted to make a statement and say Russia is not welcome because it breaks international law, it invades other countries, it takes their territory, and it starts wars, then you answer that by saying, you can eat your damn games. We're not coming.
And yet,
but nobody did it.
And yet, Andreas Evagor, at the height of the Skripal scandal, the poisoning of that former Russian spy, at no point did England consider a boycott of the World Cup.
Well, a couple of rogue MPs did. It would have been interesting if the Netherlands have qualified after what happened, of course, with the jet that was downed. But I think we're looking at it rather from a Western point of view. For instance, you're right, American sponsors don't want anything to do with the World Cup. FIFA is toxic. They've all been replaced by Chinese sponsors who can't get enough of the World Cup. So from a Western liberal European point of view, yes, but there's a big world out there that is
well,
really
good. Let them
interested in
have the
getting involved.
games. Yeah. Let them have the games.
All right, one man who Putin seems to appreciate in this context is the new boss of FIFA, Gianni Infantino, who took over after bribery scandals at the world's football governing body in 2016.
I would like to express special thanks to Mr. Infantino and underline his commitment to the ideals of sport and justice, and of course his consistently positive attitude towards our country. We know that Infantino has become the leader of FIFA during difficult times, but he's preserved like a real fighter.
He's persevered like a real fighter. Ana Navarro-Pedro, we've been talking about the issue of values and when you take a stand. The point is that, when Vladimir Putin is speaking, there is a values battle taking place over this World Cup in a way.
Exactly. And let's not forget it, with the background of America or some Americans believing that Putin has tampered with their elections and that he owns the current president of the United States somehow. So if you put this background on the scene, then yes, it's absolutely two worlds at conflict through his words.
Earlier, you were mentioning all the different venues. Some of them are white elephants. They'll never be able to fill the stadiums once the tournament is over. Nonetheless, again, the issue of when you expose, Russians getting to meet people from other parts of the world and all that. we saw a surprising image, which was the Egyptian team. Its training ground is in Grozny, and the leader of that republic, Ramzan Kadyrov, who actually went to go get Mo Salah, the star Liverpool striker, to bring him over to the pitch because he wasn't training. Your thoughts on that?
Well, actually, I think Russia tries to show this image of very hospitable country, very multi-confessional country, which is organizing such kind of a welcome for its for the teams and also for the political level, political leaders. But at the same time, as Christopher were talking about a possible of boycott of these games, well, any country on the decided to boycott it in terms of participation of these teams. But on political level, for example, we have Great Britain, Ukraine, Poland, who will not be presented on high level, even if Ukraine doesn't play. But this country calls to boycott because of dozens of people who are arrested still. And also NGOs are talking about the very bad situation of human rights.
And it has put some of the spotlight on, for instance, the hunger strike by the Ukrainian filmmaker Oleg Sentsov.
1 month already. And when we are talking about the values and about this very high level and image of Russia, we shouldn't forget also this side of Russia, which is not on a very democratic way treating the human rights.
Andrei Sevagora, you were mentioning earlier how Russia's toxic to a lot of U.S. sponsors. Also toxic, it seems, is Iran, what with Nike dropping its sponsorship deal for the shoes during the World Cup. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this puts everyone in the spotlight, the sponsors, people who are there, people who are not there, and Vladimir Putin himself, or whatever he does. Remember going back to the Sochi Olympics that you were talking about, that happened just at the same time as Ukraine. Was that a coincidence? You know, the occupation of eastern Ukraine was coming exactly the same time as the Sochi Olympics, which cost $50 billion, which is way another level from the about 4 or 5 billion that's going into this. So everyone is under the spotlight, exactly.
In terms of geopolitics, of course, the canceling of the deal with Iran has a lot to do with Trump's position on the Iran deal on nuclear power, but and his capacity of retaliation. But let's not forget, we are talking about Russia. Russia is a wonderful country. It's a European country. It's a wonderful land, and with a fantastic history. And they were on our side, on democracy, on the Allies' side, more on Second World War. Let's not forget it. After a certain moment, to be more precise. So we are talking about Putin and his regime, his authoritarian form of power, and not about the country, because we tend to say Russia as some kind of a demon, when we are actually talking about the way Putin, the ruler, rules that country. So let's watch it, maybe.
All right. Yeah, my ears are ringing, listening earlier to Christopher Dickey saying that he's not a big football fan, because on the eve of the tournament, there was a FIFA Congress, and they voted for the successors of Russia 2018 and Qatar 2022.
The member associations of Canada, Mexico, and USA have been selected by the FIFA Congress to host the 2026 FIFA World Cup. Thank you.
The NAFTA Games.
NAFTA Games. That's what they...
Coming just off that acrimonious
I'm
G7.
sure Trump will screw this up somehow. They picked the NAFTA Games. Yeah, absolutely.
Are you excited about it?
No, not in the least. No, absolutely not. But, you know, look, ever since I was a young teenager, and we are talking a long time ago, we've been hearing that soccer was coming to the States, that this was going to be the sport in America. And it has gradually taken hold, and there's a whole class of people called soccer moms, and all kinds of young boys and girls play soccer in the United States. And I think that's a great thing. But the interest in it as a spectator sport, zip.
Nonetheless, I'm really, really sorry for Morocco. My heart bleeds for them.
Yeah, fifth time unlucky there.
But they were never in with the chance, because this is a 48-team World Cup. I mean, everyone's going to qualify for this World Cup. And there's no way Morocco is going to be able to host so many countries. Although, don't forget that there was a joint World Cup held in
That's very
2002. No, believe me, a 48-team World Cup is going to be a nightmare to organise for anyone. Sepp Blatter said that 2002 was a disaster between two countries, Japan and South Korea. So organising that between the three is going to be a real challenge. But it just came down to how many stadia they have. You need a huge infrastructure for that. That's why NAFTA won against very little competition, with all respect to Morocco.
If the United States is not at war with Canada by then, but we'll see.
If you can travel back and forth, it would be tough if you can't.
Over Twitter, Donald Trump's been crowing about that winning bid with Canada and Mexico. He's also been answering critics who say he gave away too much during that Singapore summit with North Korea's leader, Kim Jong Un.
If you remember the sit-down with Barack Obama, I think he will admit this, he said the biggest problem that the United States has, and by far the most dangerous problem, and he said to me that we've ever had because of nuclear, is North Korea. Now, that was shortly before I entered office. I have solved that problem. Now we're getting it memorialized and all. But that problem is largely solved. I can now wait. I can now say, well, we have a problem. I told him, I gave him a very direct number. He can now call me if he has any difficulty.
Chris Verdicki, problem solved.
That's the way I feel about it, sure. I sleep better at night knowing it's all solved. I feel much better, absolutely. I think Trump, he was brought in to disrupt things. He's disrupting them, and he's making peace at the same time. Who the hell else could do that?
No, but cynicism aside, it is everybody, even his harshest critics, are saying it's better that they meet than that they not meet.
Yeah, it's better that they meet and that some kind of substantive negotiations take place, and that you think that the American who's involved with those understands what the hell he's talking about. But the problem with this negotiation is that you came away from it, especially listening to his press conference, first looking at the document itself, which is one page, then listening to the press conference, you come away with a sincere conviction that he has no idea what he's talking about, or that he's talking about something that is completely different than what Secretary of State Pompeo is talking about. I mean, some of the best parts of the press conference didn't even get much airtime. There is a totally surreal thing where he says, you don't have to wait 15 years for complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization. 20% would be okay. That would be okay, because he used to talk about nukes a lot with his uncle, who was at MIT, and they wrote a book about his uncle. Did you hear that? It was completely nuts. And that's exactly what we're hearing here. Problem solved. It's completely nuts.
Elena Gabriel?
Even I'm shocked to see some conservative activists who are talking about the candidature of Donald Trump for a Nobel Prize, as well as we know that this...
I think there was an MP or two in Norway who've been suggesting him.
Oh, also, yeah, I'm much more surprised. So, because for me, it was absolutely... unimaginable to see this propaganda not only from North Korean side, where the state-running TV channel broadcasted a 40-minute documentary where we show the Kim Jong Un in the streets of Singapore, and where journalists is talking about this welcome, unprecedented welcome that never any leader of country was welcomed with this crowded streets in Singapore. But from the United States side, where Kim is presented in such kind of 4-minute Hollywood-style video.
They showed him this promotional video of what North Korea could be like.
Right, but at the same time, it was a very, very propagandistic way, and it was a quite similar, like Trump's and Kim's approach to this such kind of making image of two
heroes,
leaders.
one destiny.
Exactly.
Well, like the World Cup, it was a great made-for-TV event, probably with less substance. I mean, I was lucky to be at the Olympic Games in South Korea, and one thing I learned is that the lack of trust in Kim, they're not going to believe anything that Kim says anyway in the South. And
but I mean, we did hear the South Korean leaders,
some were a little bit
noises.
worried. But again, there's already an agreement that I don't think was mentioned in this latest communique. So to use a football analogy, there was a star player that they've sold on the promise that there might be another player to replace them. But look, this is Trump. We all know it. I was there when he was, this was little rocket man, and now he's his best friend. So it could change again in a couple of days, couldn't it?
Yes, like 6 months ago, it was fire and fury, and we were on the brink of nuclear war. And now they are best pals. They have their cells, their cell, and we don't know if Kim has a cell number, but they have direct lines. So I hope they will use it to get a new tailor and new hairdressers. But apart from that, it's very, very upsetting. This pick on Robert Reich's expression, this mad king that rules the biggest military power in the world.
Well, that was a headline of a piece I wrote last week. It was the madness of King Trump.
There you go.
After the G7. I mean, it was just incredible.
There you go.
But the scary thing about that is that it's being normalized. You talk to people and you say, well, maybe you'll get something out of this. Maybe this is the way to go. Boris Johnson, the foreign secretary of Great Britain, comes out, well, he didn't know it was being recorded, but he tells other Tories, maybe this is the way we should handle Brexit. You go in, you break a lot of things, people think it's crazy, but maybe get something out of it.
One little question. There is no substance in this first meeting and into the draft that is going to be the set for of rules for negotiations. Nothing like, for instance, what Trump demands from Iran. He's tearing up the treaty with Iran on nuclear
Not
power.
only that, climate
And,
also agreement,
And
all agreements.
Kim Jong Un just came out whizzing out of that summit like some superstar, celebrity and some superstar, and with no concession made. I mean, who is that person?
Well, Trump would disagree. He'd say, he's committed. But can you imagine that Trump would accept a deal for a real estate deal in which his opposite
He's
party
dreaming
said,
of it, isn't he?
I'm committed to thinking about doing this deal. That's all he said. That's all that he did. That's all that he said.
But he told that he can trust North Korea.
Well, yeah.
It's extremely upsetting because North Korea obviously is more sound and more solid on its standing. They know where they want to go. They got it. They got the summit with the United States. On the United States side, we have no idea of what they want. We don't know. On Trump administration, Bolton and Trump are on opposite sides on this issue, and we don't know what Trump is hoping to achieve. So maybe because there is nothing, no target, maybe they will achieve something. But he can turn around. I mean, after saying like a week or 2 weeks ago that he was going to save jobs in China, as he says, in China, not in the United States, he turned around today and he slapped import tariffs on Chinese goods.
Right.
So you don't know what is anything can happen with this.
Anything can happen. All is forgiven between Donald Trump and Kim Jong Un. All is forgiven, it seems, between France and Italy. The new populist government of Giuseppe Conte, furious over what it had called the hypocritical lecturing of Emmanuel Macron over Rome's refusal to welcome the 629 migrants stranded aboard the Aquarius rescue ship. By Friday, Conte was talking of being in total agreement with his, quote, friend Emmanuel. And the French president was playing advocate for his Italian cousins.
In recent years, Europe has lacked effectiveness and solidarity. And I think the time has come, and the events of recent days have shown, our collective organization isn't up to it and doesn't meet the challenges that we face today.
So the onus is on Europe, with the big European summit taking place next week. A bit of a strange week in terms of those Franco-Italian relations. It was all sparked by those comments by the French at a time when the Italian cabinet was divided over this issue of whether or not to let that ship in.
Yeah, we're getting used to everyone beating up on each other, USA, Canada, France, Italy, and even within governments, as you talked about in the UK.
Or in Germany.
There's talk about solidarity, but where's the solidarity in Eastern European countries? Because without naming names, we know who we're talking about, they're quite happy to take the largesse from the European Union. But when it comes to taking some responsibilities for the refugees,
Are you talking about
they run for the hills.
Italy?
I'm talking about, no, I'm not talking about Eastern European countries.
Okay.
Italy and Greece have taken the brunt of this. So where's the solidarity with Italy and Greece?
Absolutely.
Of course, our first thoughts have to be with the people on that boat whose lives were in danger. But it would be really ideal. We're talking about solidarity. Maybe solidarity put to one side of forcing countries
you could put France on that basket as well, because it was so cynical.
Lots of reactions on the hashtag F24 debate earlier. One here saying both Salvini and Macron share the same ideas. Salvini being Matteo Salvini, the Italian interior minister, the head of the Lega party, the far right party, about immigration policies. Ventimiglia is that border town between France and Italy, and the Aquarius are examples of how Europe shouldn't work. We need a different federal approach for this historic phenomenon. That comment by Morrow on Twitter. Ventimiglia, where France is sending back refugees to Italy.
Well, that's why the reaction of Emmanuel Macron when he's saying that Italy is irresponsible and cynical, it is really very strange, because if France were accepting these refugees and making really strong declarations towards Italy, I would understand. But after 3 days of silence of French authorities, when even in his own party Emmanuel Macron is criticized for this silence, then he is coming out and saying, well, you are cynical and irresponsible. So, and finally, who is the most human European country who is accepting these migrants? Spain. So,
well, the new government in Spain.
New government, socialist government, right? Exactly.
No, but our correspondent who's there in Valencia right now, saying the locals are backing the Spanish government on this one. In that area, there is a left-wing government down there in Valencia. When it comes to Italy, we're still wondering when we see Giuseppe Conte at the Élysée Palace, who's the man behind the throne, because he's not himself a politician, he's a technocrat. And all week long, we haven't heard much about the five-star movement. It's all been about the interior minister, Matteo Salvini, the leader of the far-right League.
Well, that's right. Although I think Luigi Di Maio, who's the five-star leader who's in the government, I think he was responding to what was perceived as, rightly so, as a French insult. And actually, Salvini's coming out of this looking quite good. This government is looking quite good because his argument is a rational argument. It's not his usual racist, xenophobic stuff. Exactly. It's a straightforward argument, which is we're bearing the brunt of this. Nobody in Europe is helping us. France is bitching about it, and they don't do a damn thing about it.
Yeah, and earlier this week, Italy took in another 900 aboard 2 ships.
Yeah, and he's getting himself tied in knots, though, because he wants to stop these rescue vessels like the Aquarius.
Called it a cruise ship.
And so he wants to stop these ships like the Aquarius, rescue vessels, which often pick up the migrants very close to the shore of Libya and bring them to Italy. But there's a problem now that people haven't focused on. We had an excellent article about it, which is that an American warship off the coast of Libya picked up 40 migrants who were in a sinking ship. They didn't pick up the bodies of 12 others for some reason, but they did pick up those 40, and now the American warship doesn't know where to go.
Yeah, the USS Trenton, and it was on its way, for military maneuvers?
We're not sure exactly what it was doing, but it was out there about, some miles off the coast of Libya, and it saw this boat and it did the right thing.
Because that's what the human traffickers do now. They don't bring them all across to Europe anymore. They just get them off Libyan territorial waters and leave them drifting on the sea.
Oh, exactly.
And so that's why we have these Aquarius and all these, and waiting for cargo or military ship or all these humanitarian organizations going to pick them up, but there are more and more dead people. But the position of Paris, Macron just made a fool of himself in Europe this week with everything that has been explained, because France is the first country, and Salvini told it in a very quiet...
You're saying he made a fool of himself, but a majority of the French people don't want to take in more migrants.
They don't want to take more migrants, but then you cannot use arguments of saying that Italy was irresponsible and hypocritical, and cynical, because he was being himself hypocritical.
His own party is split, so he has some people within his party who are for and some are against.
We know that he's preparing the next elections with this position, and hoping to grab more right-wing electorate. We do understand it, but he also has a stance in Europe, and he came along as the white Chevalier Blanc, the white
horse.
the white knight of the fight for Europe, and you cannot do it going against the new government in Italy. You may not like it. It's very upsetting to a founder country of the European Union. Just let me finish, please. Being, I know having this kind of government, right, populist government, but it was the wrong fight that Macron picked. It was the wrong one because the facts are against him, and that's what Salvini did. And Salvini tailored himself stature of statesman with this story. On top of it, you hear here in France, Macron, when he got these rebukes from Italy that you cannot answer it, he just said, look at who's talking. That was his answer, was the Palais-Élysée answer. Look at who's talking.
Well, he did make conciliatory noises when he spoke on the telephone with
and you had someone from his party, a leader from his party, saying, I feel like Italy makes me feel like puking. This is Trumpism.
Well, it's Trumpism in the way of communication, because years ago this would have been done in private. Now it's done on Twitter. That's got to be an influence, surely, of Trump. This is people having this public argument. I know people have always argued.
Macron tried to stay silent at the beginning of the week, and people were saying, why aren't you speaking out? Because his own party is completely divided on this issue.
In the world of social media, everyone in the public eye has to have a strong opinion on everything all the time. No one can stay silent. And that's maybe where Trump is leading, if you want to put it that way.
Well, he
just puts it all out there on Twitter.
Yes, but you cannot. This is Europe. This is not the United States. Even for the United States, there are people just, their chins dropping, their jaw dropping.
Yeah, is it impossible to hold your tongue?
Oh, is it? Oh, well, I hold my tongue all the time. I mean, I never say what I think.
If you're the president of the republic.
If you're the president. I'm not the president yet, so.
Yet.
But I think that it would be wise for any president to hold his tongue or hold his fingers, short though they may be, from, doing this kind of thing. I don't even want to go down the road of Trump and Twitter. It's like so obscene. I always wonder where he is when he's tweeting early in the morning, the time when most people are in the bathroom.
The migrant crisis, by the way, we were talking about how it's really putting to the test Macron's coalition, this centrist coalition. It's also testing Germany's grand coalition government. But it's not the Social Democrats that Angela Merkel's worried about. Instead, her conservative Bavarian sister party, the CSU, its boss, Horst Seehofer, met separately from the chancellor with the Austrian chancellor in Berlin this week, Chancellor Kurz, in coalition in Austria with the far right. And guess who takes over the rotating presidency of the EU next month?
I had a phone conversation with the Italian Interior Minister Matteo Salvini yesterday, and it was his wish that Rome, Vienna and Berlin, on the level of Interior Ministers, should cooperate on security, the fight against terrorism, and on the key issue of migration. I have accepted, and we have talked about it.
Ich habe das angenommen, wir haben das heute ausgetauscht.
In our view, we need an axis of the willing in the fight against illegal immigration, and we are happy that with you as German Interior Minister, we have a strong partner in the fight.
Great choice of words.
Elena Gabriel, an axis of the willing.
Well, I'm quite surprised seeing how not only European Union is divided from east to west, but also in this old European Union is also divided in this issue. And I think that this problem between Italy and France make much more difficult to find a solution at the end of June during the European Council. And I remember I've read in a French newspaper that the first reaction of Emmanuel Macron was to some of ministers were quoted in the newspaper, that the reaction of Emmanuel Macron was to accept these migrants, but then he thought that it would not be a short-term solution of the problem. He wants to suggest a long-term, but I wonder in which way accepting these migrants would be the problem for looking for long-term solution, and what he will suggest exactly, maybe to adopt the quotas in this old Europe, whereas Eastern European countries are against, and we know that Italy, Greece are much more suffering from this migrant crisis. So maybe to try with them or 6 EU countries to divide these migrants between them if Eastern Europe is not
involved. Finally, because we're running short on time, I've got to ask, what's in a name? For 27 years, the nation known as the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia has been left out of the European Union and NATO because the Greeks object to the use of the name of the northern province of, Macedonia. This week saw a historic compromise to allow the government in Skopje to use the name Northern Macedonia. It's cost the Greek Prime Minister a vote of no confidence, one that Alexis Tsipras is confident he can override when the vote comes this weekend. Still, you see the nationalists demonstrating outside Parliament in Athens. North of the border, the president is squarely siding with the opposition.
My position is final, and I will not yield to any pressure, blackmail, or threats. I will not support or sign such a damaging agreement. Thank you.
Which way is this going to go, Andreas Evagora?
Oh, who knows after 27 years, but people seem to look at this issue with some mirth. But look, this part of the world is amazingly inflammatory. It's not just the name, it's obviously the recognition of a name. And it's very, very important. I remember when Macedonia first started calling itself Macedonia, the Greek postal service, if they saw a letter with Macedonia, they would throw it in the bin. Yes. It didn't exist. I mean, this does affect people's lives. And in this part of the world, names are extremely inflammatory and historic and important. Just look at the Western Balkans. So it has to be treated really with kid gloves by all concerned.
You asked what's in a name in Europe? It's blood and soil. And that's you could not laugh about this.
Can't they find a compromise?
Well, for the Greeks, Macedonia is in Greece, and we know the story. Hence Fyrom, hence the fudges.
But it's not just the name. We're talking about Slavic Macedonia and Greek Macedonia, which is basically a racial issue, and a racial or ethnic issue, and that's at the heart of it. The Greeks say basically these Slavs can't call themselves Macedonia. Macedonia is all about Alexander the Great, Hellenic history, all these kinds of things. Those Slavs, they have nothing to do with any of that. That's the nature of this argument, and it's the nature of the attempt at a compromise.
And we see a compromise is at hand.
Yes, and if this issue is really resolved, it would be really the illustration that NATO and EU membership perspective can resolve conflicts, because right now Macedonia could not be member of EU and NATO as soon as this conflict is not resolved with the neighbor countries.
It's not just an issue in that part of the world. Look, in Great Britain, there's still arguments. Is it the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland? When they go to the Olympics, the Northern Ireland insists that Northern Ireland is in the name of the country, and now people are starting to call the country Britain and not United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So, these are sensitive issues. What can be closer to people's hearts and nationality than the name of their country?
All right, well, the name of the show is The World This Week. We're going to have to leave it there. But I want to thank you, Andreas Evagora. I want to thank as well Ana Navarro Pedro, as well Christopher Dickey, Elena Gabrielan. Thank you for being with us here.